The room felt sterile, like it was designed to drain emotion out of everything, except Jasmine. Her hands were steady on the outside, but her breath? That betrayed her. She had rehearsed every possible question with Gino 1,000 times. What's her favorite side of the bed? Who does the dishes? But nothing had prepared her for the vibration in her purse. Quick. Sharp. Like it knew. Like it wanted to interrupt. Jasmine looked down at her phone. One notification. One sender she didn't recognize. One subject line that made her blood run cold. All it took was a single word to change the temperature of the entire room. Michigan. This wasn't nerves. This wasn't interview anxiety. This was danger. Emotional, legal, existential. All wrapped up in a document she didn't ask for, but couldn't ignore. This is Oliva, and you're watching 90 Days Scoop Us, the place where receipts hit harder than explanations. If you're breathing harder than Gino right now, do yourself a favor. Subscribe before this train wreck finds a tunnel you can't come back from. And tell me in the comments, would you have played it cool after what she saw? Jasmine didn't even unlock the email all the way. She didn't have to. Her instincts did the math, court language, a case number, and Gino's name, showing up together like they had a secret romance she didn't know about. She closed the screen and stared ahead, willing her face to stay neutral while her stomach twisted into knots. Gino must have sensed the air shift, because he leaned over and whispered, too quickly, too cheerfully, "You okay?" That was his tell. When he had something to hide, he overperformed. Big smile. Calm voice. Like a kid who already knocked over the vase and was now complimenting your hair to distract you. She glanced at him, nodded once, and forced a closed lip smile. But something in her eyes must have slipped. Gino looked back at the officer, tapping his leg like a metronome. Jasmine knew that tap. He used it at every appointment he couldn't control. And now, neither of them could control this. Whatever was in that email, it wasn't just a message. It was a warning. And it had already started to burn. Hours earlier, the apartment had been silent. But not the peaceful kind. It was the kind of hush that made you pick up on the weight of your own breathing. Jasmine stood in front of the mirror adjusting her hair, not out of vanity, but survival. She repeated to herself, "It's just paperwork. It's just protocol." But in her chest, everything tightened like the day was pretending to be smaller than it really was. Behind her, Gino was already moving around too loud, too confident. He cracked a joke about how long immigration offices take. How maybe they'd beat traffic, maybe even make a Costco run after. Jasmine forced out a small laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. She hated how familiar that cycle had become. Him stretching positivity like cling wrap over silence. Her pretending to relax under it. He kept talking. He was always talking when he was uncomfortable, telling her it would all be fine, that they had nothing to worry about, that they'd done everything the right way. And sure, they did the paperwork, took the photos, memorized their story, but Jasmine couldn't silence the part of her that wondered if Gino had ever truly told her everything. This wasn't the first time doubt crept in. Months ago, in the middle of a conversation about future kids, something shifted in his tone. He got vague, defaulted to jokes, changed the subject. She let it go, not because she trusted the answer, but because pressing would have meant facing the possibility of being lied to. This morning, she ironed her blouse 3 times. Not because it was wrinkled, but because busy hands are easier than anxious questions. Gino came behind her, wrapped his arms around her, kissed her shoulder. He said, "You look like you're already approved." Charm on cue. Scripted. She smiled, but her body didn't relax. Instead, she scanned his face in the mirror. Something about his eyes looked rehearsed, like he wasn't calming her. He was calming himself. That's when she remembered what her cousin told her 2 years ago, before the spousal visa, before the moves. If their calm feels forced, it probably is. She laughed it off back then. And now? She couldn't unhear it. Back in that immigration office, everything felt too bright, too sharp. Jasmine hadn't spoken since they sat down, letting Gino do the talking. He seemed to like it that way, jumping in to answer, adding extra details the officer didn't ask for. He looked like a man delivering a presentation. She looked like someone handing over her future. The officer asked how they met. Gino grinned and launched into the story about their first messages online, how they bonded over love of local food, how he flew all the way to Panama to see her. Jasmine nodded when he glanced at her, but her hand stayed curled around her phone in her lap, her thumb mindlessly brushing against its edge, like her body knew it was carrying something radioactive. That vibration hadn't come back, but the damage was done. She couldn't focus. The preview of the email had lit up in her mind like a siren. Case number 28654M. Subject: legal documentation required. State of Michigan. Her eyes had locked on one phrase before she killed the screen. Paternity claim filed. Michigan. Legal. Gino. She blinked hard, tried to pace her breathing. The walls started to fade around her now. The sound of the keyboard clacking, of another couple's anxious whispering across the room. But all Jasmine could hear was blood in her ears. The email pulsed behind her eyes like a truth trying to be born. Suddenly she turned. Not a big motion. Quiet. Deliberate. She looked at Gino, not the Gino spinning charm, not the Gino smiling at the officer, but the man she lived beside, questioned in her sleep, cried for in silence. Her voice didn't shake. She leaned in slightly and said, "Is there something you forgot to tell me?" Gino froze. Not his whole body, just the exact muscles that betray a lie. His jaw twitched, hands went still, smile stalled half a second too long. Then came the laugh. Lightweight, like it took effort. "Babe, what are you talking about?" But she knew that voice. That's the voice he used when she once found a weird charge on his card, and he said, "Probably a glitch." She didn't need to open the email to feel the truth. She'd already heard it in his laugh, and now she was about to make sure the officer heard it too. Gino's smile didn't just fade. It peeled off like paint, exposed to heat. Too fast. Too obvious. He tried to catch it, patch it back on with charm. "It's probably spam or something," he said, glancing toward her phone like it burned. His voice cracked on the word probably. Jasmine didn't answer. She didn't need to. The more he filled the room with explanations, the more obvious the lie became. His reputation had always relied on quick responses. Instant. Rehearsed. But she wasn't rushing. Her stillness now felt louder than his entire monologue. She didn't accuse. She didn't yell. That's what made it land harder. If this were a movie, she'd throw the phone, storm out, sob into the street. But this was real life. And real pain doesn't always scream. It chooses precision. So Jasmine unlocked her phone, found the email, tapped it open, not entirely, just enough to confirm what she already felt rising in her bones. Then, quietly, she placed the phone on the table between them and said to the officer, "I just need help understanding this." The officer paused. Gino didn't. He reached for the phone instantly, like he could shove the words back into the device if he got there first. But the officer caught the motion and lifted one polite hand, then picked up the phone. "Sir, I'll read through it." Gino's hands retreated to his lap. Trembling, fingers entwined like he was trying to tie himself together. Jasmine sat still, arms crossed loosely, watching. Not the officer, not the phone. Gino. She wanted to see his face while the truth introduced itself. Control doesn't live in volume. It lives in presence. And for the first time in this relationship, Jasmine wasn't walking on conversational eggshells. She had nothing to defend, nothing to cover. Her silence wasn't fear. It was authority. The officer's expression changed almost instantly. He didn't react big. No widened eyes. No drama. Just a small inhale and a slower blink. Measured stillness. That's when it hit. The document was valid. Gino's eyes darted to the floor, the clock, the ceiling, anywhere but the screen in the officer's hand. And Jasmine? She finally had nothing to look away from. The officer didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The words did everything on their own. This is a paternity filing. Michigan. Legal acknowledgement of support. Dina confirmation pending. Those weren't buzzwords. They were bullets, each one landing harder than the last. Jasmine sat completely still. She had no idea what her face was doing, but her body was locked. The mention of a child shredded the oxygen in the room. This wasn't a rumor. This wasn't a vague accusation from an ex. This was a legal motion. Gino's name printed under words like obligation and failure to disclose. Gino jumped in faster than Jasmine had ever seen. Look, I didn't even know this was official. I was told it wasn't going anywhere. She said it wasn't mine. The words started fast and then bled into each other. The same panic he used to mask cracks back when he promised that one idiotic business charge wasn't what it looked like. Except now it wasn't Jasmine he had to convince. It was the government. He turned toward her. Please don't let this mess everything up. This isn't new. It's just old drama being stirred up. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She blinked slowly, once, and leaned back in her seat. When performance meets reality, there's only one thing left to do. Choose what role you'll keep playing. And Jasmine had officially quit the cast. She wasn't the supportive wife brushing away messes in private anymore. She wasn't holding space. She wasn't holding him up. What she was holding was a ledger of every time she'd asked if there was something she should know. And now, she had something even more unforgivable than deception. Confirmation. The officer put the phone down and gave Gino one look before turning to Jasmine. In light of this, would you prefer to continue this interview privately? That pause. That question. That moment was everything. Because for the first time, someone in authority wasn't just asking about her documents, they were asking what she wanted. The door clicked shut behind Gino, like the end of a chapter Jasmine didn't realize she'd been reading, blind. For a few seconds, the silence expanded around her, not as absence, but as space. Real, unfiltered space. The kind that asks, not tells. The kind she hadn't been allowed to feel in a long time. The officer didn't rush. He adjusted the file in front of him, paused, then looked at her, not through her, not past her, but at her. I'd like to start again, he said quietly. Just with you. Are you comfortable answering some questions alone? She nodded, even though comfortable wasn't the word. Clear was. She felt clear. Do you feel informed about the future you've committed to? He asked. The question wasn't aggressive. It wasn't even accusatory. But it hit harder than any paperwork ever could. Jasmine exhaled, then told the truth. I thought I did. But now I realize I was mostly hoping. Hoping that what I didn't know wouldn't matter. Hoping if I stayed quiet, things would stay calm. And just like that, it spilled out. She talked about the warnings she brushed off. The signs she gave soft explanations for. How love felt safer than starting over, so she called it patience. She wrapped red flags in paperwork, in sacrifice, in long-distance devotion. She buried her instincts under phrases like give it time and he's just stressed. The officer didn't interrupt. He let her speak. And somewhere in the middle of explaining how she became the one who bent first, and always, Jasmine understood something. Silence doesn't mean peace. It means someone's benefiting from your self-denial. And it hadn't been her. When she'd signed the documents, smiled for the photos, sat beside Gino in this process for months, she believed she was building a shared life. But now, it was clear. She'd been building a cover for his. The officer closed the folder gently. For now, he said evenly, we have to suspend this application pending further review. You still have rights. And time. This isn't a decision. It's a pause. But Jasmine knew at that moment, some pauses don't lead back to the same story. They start a new one. Gino sat outside the interview room, elbows on his knees, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned pale. The waiting area suddenly felt hostile, as if even the walls were watching him. For once, there was no Jasmine beside him to do damage control, to nod politely when he fumbled, to stitch up silence with grace. He glanced around. Nobody made eye contact. Everyone else was locked in their own nerves. But Gino? He was locked in panic. The kind that hits once you realize the one person holding your image together on camera and off has finally stopped carrying your weight. His phone buzzed. Notifications piled up. A few missed calls. A message from someone listed only as private. He shoved it back in his pocket. Didn't even open it. Timing was never his strength, but ignoring had always come easy. It was dawning on him now. How much of this process wasn't built on love, but performance. Gino had learned the script early. Smile, reassure, hug at just the right moment. Tell them the story about your first vacation together. Frame sacrifice as devotion. When Jasmine's face looked unsure, he stepped in. When her words slowed, he finished her sentences. He thought that was leadership. Turns out, it was control masquerading as support. And without her there, he had no shields left. All he had was sweat on his forehead and a version of events that wouldn't hold up if even one more person asked the wrong question. He heard footsteps returning. The door opened. Jasmine stepped back through, but she didn't walk toward him. She moved to the opposite end of the room, quietly took a seat by the far wall, and looked straight ahead. That was worse than yelling. That was worse than tears. Jasmine didn't look hurt anymore. She looked finished. And Gino had no idea what part of her was coming back into the room with a story, and what part had already left. He tried to keep it together for the first few minutes. Straightened his back, wiped his palms on his jeans, opened his mouth like he'd rehearsed the apology on the walk back. But when Gino finally started speaking, the performance cracked. His voice shook, and the floodgates came with it. I didn't know how to tell you. I swear I was going to. I was scared. I didn't want to lose you, Jasmine. Tears followed. The kind he never showed when he disappointed her before. The kind that used to soften her resolve. He leaned forward, hands open like someone offering up the last of their dignity. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. She just watched. There was a time she'd rushed to fill silence like this, with reassurance, with rationalizations, with love. But now? She let the words land. All of them. She sat there in steady quiet. The kind of quiet that forces a person to face their own echo. He didn't stop. He talked in circles, said it didn't mean anything, that it was from before her, that he didn't think it would follow him, that he'd handle everything now, that he needed her to understand. When he finally paused, she leaned slightly forward. Not cold, not cruel, just honest. Fear is human, Gino, she said softly. But fear isn't an excuse to lie. You didn't just protect yourself. You made choices for me, too. Without asking. His eyes dropped to the floor. This wasn't one mistake, she said, voice low but steady. It's the pattern. The silences. The timing. The way the truth only shows up when it's too late to matter. He whispered her name, hopeful. She folded her hands, then looked him straight in the face. I can't build a life with someone who makes me feel like a guest in their secrets. And in that moment, the temperature in the room didn't drop, but something broke, quietly and completely, between them. Outside the building, the air felt colder. Not because of the weather, but because Jasmine's body finally registered the shock that had been building since the interview started. Everything slowed. Her feet touched each step like gravity had changed. She instinctively pulled her coat tighter, not for warmth, but protection. From what? She wasn't sure. The cameras clicked on before she even reached the sidewalk. They were waiting, phones out, lenses pointed straight at her, hungry for meltdown, drama, sound bites. But Jasmine didn't give them any of that. She stood still for a beat, breathed in through her nose, and then said what she came to say. I came in today for an immigration interview. I thought it was about verifying a relationship. Turns out, it was about verifying the truth I wasn't given. The application is suspended. Click. Record. Zoom. I'm not answering details. What matters is, if something that directly affects your future is hidden from you, you are allowed to stop everything and ask why. Even during an interview. Especially during one. She didn't name Gino. She didn't have to. His absence was the only name she needed to say. The space beside her was empty, and it screamed louder than an argument. Inside, Gino stood near the inner hallway, watching part of her statement stream live from a monitor. He didn't blink. Didn't move. He looked smaller now. Not defeated. Not sad. Just cornered in a maze he'd designed while thinking no one else would notice how the walls kept changing. Jasmine had been the map. Now she was the exit. Back outside, Jasmine's voice wavered only once. When someone asked if she thought the relationship was real, she paused, not for drama, but for weight. You know what? I made it real. Every day. I defended it. I sacrificed for it. But love doesn't work if one person's building a home and the other's storing secrets under the floor. The line landed harder than she expected. You could tell from the shift in the crowd. There was no applause. Just a stillness that came when everyone processed something too relatable. She didn't cry, or lash out, or throw accusations across state lines. She simply stepped aside from the microphones, nodded once, and walked off. No handlers. No hugs, no updates, barely even a glance back. Reporters looked at each other. Some followed her with cameras. Most watched in silence, like they knew they'd just captured something they couldn't edit around. Back in the building, Gino tried to speak to a clerk, anything to stay in control of some part of this. But all that came out was a hoarse, "What happens next?" And no amount of spinning could change the way the clerk looked at him now. Not with regret, not with anger, but with protocol. Because now, it was official. The green card process wasn't canceled. It was paused. That distinction felt more terrifying than a flat-out denial. It meant consequence was still deciding who to land on. Gino checked his phone again. Messages were pouring in. Friends, family, a couple blocked numbers. His mom had sent him a question mark. Literally that. Just a question mark. And somehow, that hit harder than anything Jasmine said. 1 hour ago, Gino had control of the room, the story, the tone. Now, Jasmine had control of the silence. And he didn't even know where she'd gone. She'd slid past him after her statement, the way you know someone's doing, more than avoiding you. They're choosing not to see you. That's the difference. Avoidance leaves the door open. But Jasmine had shut hers. And the click echoed more loudly than any word done could have. He texted her once. "I'm still here if you want to talk." Then stared at the screen like it would deliver more than a read receipt. But it didn't ding. Didn't blink. Didn't move. The same way she hadn't. Jasmine, meanwhile, had made it around the corner. Away from the reporters. Her phone in hand, texts piling up one by one, friends asking if she was okay, her cousin sending, "Say the word and I'll book a flight." But Jasmine hadn't replied yet, not because she didn't want to, but because she finally understood something she hadn't put into words until now. Not responding was a response. For the first time, she didn't feel compelled to narrate her pain for the comfort of others. She didn't explain. She didn't defend her decision. She didn't package it into digestible hashtags or polite excuses. She just let the silence exist. That's the thing about public fallouts on reality TV. Everyone thinks the dramatic moment is the explosion, the reveal. But in this case, the real fallout was the quiet. Gino didn't storm out. He didn't scream. Jasmine didn't sob. There was no final pan to a door slam or a tearful confessional. Instead, there was exposure. And after that, space. And in that space, Jasmine disappeared. Not to hide, but to reflect, to feel without translation. She didn't know how long the visa process would be paused. She didn't know what proof would be requested, or how this child situation in Michigan would play out. All she knew was that some papers were heavier than others, and this one outweighed everything they'd submitted together. And even though she wasn't in front of the cameras anymore, the world hadn't stopped watching. Days passed, not with drama, not with headlines, but with the kind of quiet that only follows a storm people didn't see coming. There was no official update, no court ruling, no new posts from the couple. Gino's page went still. Jasmine's stories faded off. And the silence stretched, not as suspense, but as closure uncomfortable in its simplicity. Jasmine no longer spoke about the interview. Not to reporters, not to followers, not to people asking if she was doing better. She didn't need to. Something had shifted. Not her situation, but her sentiment. The way she moved in conversations had changed. The way her name sat in spaces without his attached to it. Because whatever came next wasn't about rebuilding a relationship. It was about reclaiming herself from it. She still didn't confirm anything publicly. Whether she'd try again. Whether Gino was out of her life permanently. What she did make clear, through silence, posture, tone, was that she was no longer willing to give more to something that gave less back in truth than it did in performance. This wasn't the end of their story, because their story had already ended. What this was the beginning of Jasmine choosing not to narrate her pain to make other people feel comfortable with her strength. For once, she didn't need to defend him, or explain herself, or walk it all back the second the cameras turned off. Some people keep talking because they're trying to hold their version of the truth together. Jasmine stopped talking because she no longer owed anyone the illusion of unity. Call that avoidance. Call it wisdom. Either way, it didn't hinge on what Gino said next, or what immigration decided next, or how the show might edit things later. Jasmine's closure wasn't loud, and it didn't ask for validation. It was in the way she said less and meant more. And if you thought the situation was messy, wait until you see what happens when lies, love, and paperwork collide across 3 passports instead of 2. Our next story? A green card triangle that takes fade couples to a whole new level. You'll want to sit down for this one.